Anime Architecture book collects anime sci-fi Megacities. Way back in the winter 2011, I was wandering around Berlin one cold day when I found myself at a pretty incredible exhibition called Proto Anime Cut. The show, organized by curator Stefan Riekels, featured background paintings, concept art, and reference photos for some of my all-time favorite anime films, including Pat Labor and Ghost in the Shell. Now those are intricate backgrounds are in the background in Riekels' new art book, Anime Architecture. Imagine worlds and endless megacities. If you're anything like me, you can stare at this book for hours. Appreciate the intricate details put into backgrounds that, in many cases, appear on screen for just a few seconds. Specifically, anime architecture feature films from the height of when anime backgrounds were done with pencil, paper, and paintbrush, like Akira, the Oshi paid labor films, and Ghost in the Shell, and tracks their gradual transition into a hybrid format with computer-enhanced films like The Concrete, Innocence, and the first two Evangelion Rebuild films. I met up with Riekels over Zoom last week to talk about how the book came together, what inspired him to create it, and what anime megacities mean to us. The following conversation is intended for length and clarity. Sign up. Anime Architecture Imagine Worlds and Endless Megacities are available from the author's website. Please tell me about your background and how you got into Japanese animation. My background it's in the exhibition making. I work at the Transmedia Festival in Berlin in exhibition section. In 2005, I had a chance to travel to Japan for a project. I got hooked on the Japan feeling and wanted to go back. After that, a friend of mine, David Dohely, hired me as a research assistant to work on an exhibition about anime. That was in 2007. I had a very privileged start into this world universe. We went to the studios directly and talked to the curators, and I saw the drawings for the first time. The first thing I saw were the background artwork for Ghost in the Shell and Pat Labor made by Ogura Hiramasa, the art director. It was clear to me that these things had to be seen in a somewhere in a museum or gallery. 4 years later, I was able to realize this first instance of my anime research called Proto Anime Cut and also the publication Proto Anime Cut Archive. That was the initial step. We got quite a large amount of drawings out of Japan. Well, out of the studios, actually, for the first time, I represented them at Kunstler Haus Bethanien in Berlin, a contemporary art space, who were opened into this very unconventional exhibition in which it wasn't clear whether it was art, design, or something in between. This show was quite successful. In the travel around Europe, the book was also successful. Then in 2016, I approached the Architecture Museum here in Berlin. The idea was to scale down the previous exhibition, add another layer of content, and really focus on architecture to give the project more depth and more interesting insights. This show traveled to London. At this point, the first catalog, the Proto Anime Cut archive book, was sold out. Thames and Hudson came to me and said that when I wanted to reprint this book or make a new one, and I thought that immediately I didn't want to reprint old stuff. I want to make new things. I also knew what had been missing for the project. The Akira chapter because that's the hardest one to get. Actually, I met Otoma Katsuhiro in 2008 and proposed this idea to him. But he declined. I met him again in 2010, but he declined again. So in 2018, I proposed to it in a personal letter and gave him all kinds of references. Finally, he approved. That's the long story and how get the cover of the book and this great chapter in Akira. And now there's also a Japanese edition. What has that experience been like? Well, it's already sold out, or nearly so. So there's a second print run coming. It's really successful there. A lot of the reaction I hear from Japan is usually something like, oh, why did a German author and British publisher produce such a book? Not a Japanese researcher and a Japanese publisher. And the answer is very simple. It's because of the protective nature of Japanese rights management. I think not really seen Japanese researcher who will even try to attempt to compile such a book. It's very difficult because the assets belong to so many different companies. Ultimately, it's more feasible to take it out of Japan and then re-import. In the introduction to the book, you write about your fascination with paint and pencils and paper. Could you talk a little bit about what that appeals to you? Well, in my view, this art form is slowly dying. It's gradually disappearing. These drawings we have in the book are really the peak of an art form. In Japanese, you say natsukashi. This feeling you get when you see something that's almost dead or already dead. And you remember the liveliness and the beauty of it that's at the center of my interest. And these pieces are just outstanding quality. It's hard to find such mastery. These artists produce hundreds of pieces for movies. There are very few people who can do this on such a great level. I was simply stunned by these pieces, and as someone who produces exhibitions, I was sure many other people who would be too. The success of this project is partially because now artists of the younger generation are trained digitally and they cannot imagine how to work without deleting your first or last stroke. Control C doesn't exist in the world. When people view the exhibition of the book or the book, sometimes you ask, what software did you use? They cannot imagine that for today's perspective that just where these works were drawn on paper. It's just another world. Something that struck me reading strong the book was not how these artists, without digital manipulation, could replicate the way a camera sees a world, replicating a wide-angle lens, for example. It's pretty crazy. Do they use photographic references or wide-angle lenses? Probably you just take a picture of a cube, and then you have a reference of how the perspective lines will be. When it's a steady shot, you can stimulate it with the still image on a camera, so we can get really close to the cinematic expression. When the animation camera starts moving, you cannot simulate this anymore. So that's really imagination and trial and error. How far can you get in the simulation of this wide angle when the camera is moving? You really have to try and try again. And it takes a long time. It just practice. Watabe Takashi and Asushi Takeyoshi are among the masters of this. I think it's really impressive what they can do with their pencils, simulating focal plane. When you came to Japan to interview some of these guys, were you surprised that someone was interested in their works to this degree? Yes, they were aware that people were integrated in their work. Of course, Ogura, for example, had published an art book before. It was surprising that somebody wanted to show their original pieces on a wet wall in a museum in Europe. That was surprising because in the publications you find in Japan, all the images are cropped. You never see the outskirts of the drawing, the dirty parts. It took me a long time for convince them that it's exactly what we want to see, because it proves this intermediary status of these materials as drawings made the film for film. And as beautiful artifacts, which could be appreciated in a museum that was difficult, in help that it came from burden from far away, and that I insisted for a long time that we have to take the originals and not prints. It takes a lot of effort, but now all the people who are gradually convinced support the project. How do you choose which titles to include in this book? The whole thing is an extension of a refocus of the proto-anime card project. It was clear that the focus is science fiction. The 80s to 90s, the peak of this craft, that was when the most detailed backgrounds were drawn on paper. We wanted to have this and focus on the art directors. The Akira fight took a lot of energy, but it really needs Akira if it's going to be the book on science fiction anime in the 80s and 90s. I also added the pieces for the early 2000s because I felt that it was necessary to show how this art form is slowly disappearing, how the drawings become empty, who more avoid spaces, and how they are used as textures and 3D modeling. I understand now that we've achieved something really interesting because of the reaction of the readers. I think the largest part of the audience of this book are concept artists and designers, people working in industry. I'm very happy that I can feed their inspiration. These backgrounds are meant to be seen in film or on a screen and are often partially covered up by cells. Were there any surprises when you look at the close-up rather than in theater on the screen? You just reminded me of another very important selection criteria for the book. All these anime are feature films. In these films, you have more budget for the artwork because you need to fill the big screen. You need more details, and therefore, these drawings are much more detailed than TV series. Now, that happened during the production of this book is that many of the movies, like Ghost in the Shell and Akira, got a 4K re-release, or remastering. It is very high definition video. You can see sometimes even more detail in the background than you can see in this book, because the resolution is higher on screen. That's a really strange situation because print had always been the highest resolution, but the beauty of this background in the book or in the museum is that you can study them for a long time, which gives you a much deeper understanding on the screen. On the screen, you can stop, but you never see it in total if the camera is moving, and you can appreciate or understand how it's been made into the illusion of a moving camera. You understand how the movie was made when you see the whole thing. You got this collection of films that a lot of science fiction fans love, and at the surface it seems to look very similar, but actually when you dig into them, they'll have quite a lot of differences when you're struck by any of those differences. Right, you look at them so superficially, it's a coherent look. It's all looks like anime, but you have all these differences but also coherences. But you look at the careers of the art directors, especially Ogura, whose career is very prominent in this book. From Pat Labor to Akira, he worked on almost all the production here. You can see how the style Ogura and others develop over time, how they evolve along with digital tools. This is especially important when it comes to works of Kosamori. He started purely with line drawings and then slowly moved into the digital realm. They began integrating everything. I found it really competing to trace the artistic evolution of these artists. And we had this book and overall thematic focus. It would be really good to have books in each art director. One of my favorite parts of the book is the location photos from Haruhiko Ikami. We talk a bit about his still photography. Yes, it's fascinating to see the black and white photography and the idea that he was ordered to take black and white photographs in order to not influence the film's polar color palette. To me, he's a very special person because he used to be almost the right hand of Oshii in creating these sets. He was the camera eyes of Oshii because Oshii is, among all these characters in the book, the most cinematic one. Is the one who really pushes the idea of the camera lens and the layout work to extremes. It's probably impossible to figure out what Oshii or Origami decided aesthetically which angles to photograph and how. I think they're very close because in all the location trips, they were together apart from the location photographs. Higami also took a lot of documentation. For Pat Labor, they went gun shooting. How does it work to shoot a rifle? Really? How does it move? How do you move when you shoot? So they study many things.